along here. Loren Spivak, the free market warrior, was born and raised in Massachusetts and spent most of his adult life in New York City. Before becoming active in politics, Spivak worked for several nonprofits and is a management consultant for both profit and nonprofit companies. Spivak founded Free Market Warrior in 2009 in an effort to make a positive difference in American politics and economics. He was expelled from Concord Mills Mall in North Carolina in July of 2009 for selling material critical of the Obama administration.
All right.
Mall owners, Simon Property Group, are major Democratic donors. Since then, Loren has devoted his time to teaching conservative groups about free market economics. He conducts economic literacy seminars across the United States. So far, Spivak has delivered his famous seminar on economic literacy to almost 300 groups in 24 states. Spivak is also the author of The New Democrat, a parody history of the Obama administration based on a famous children's book. With pitch-perfect rhyme and clever illustrations, The New Democrat transforms the political personalities of our times into cartoon characters in a conservative morality play. Spivak's second book, The Gorax, is a parody of the environmental movement, starring Al Gore as the misguided gremlin who uses government to destroy prosperity without ever accomplishing even his own goals. The Gorax is a powerful and yet humorous lesson about the dangers of idealism gone awry. Mr. Spivak's latest book, The Wizard of Is, a parody of Hillary's America, will be out this summer, but I think I see some back there in the back. So with no further ado, let's bring up Mr. Spivak and let him do that.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me. It's great to be in Florida. A little chilly, but it's great to be here. My name is Loren Spivak. I go by the nickname the Free Market Warrior because I travel the country from coast to coast, from Maine to San Diego. I travel the country and I talk to groups like yours about free market economics. It is my contention that the future of our country may rely on our ability to understand free market economics. And so a number of years ago I put together the seminar that was just mentioned called Economic Literacy. It's a 2-night, 7-hour program designed basically for Tea Party groups who want to understand the facts of life of economics, who want to win the argument with your liberal cousin over Thanksgiving dinner because you understand economics. So my first mission here is if you'd like me to come back at some point and do the seminar, I think you'd like it. As I said, I've done it 300 times in 25 states now, but not Florida. This is actually the first time I've ever been to, on tour in Florida. So I would love to come and do that and share it with you. I think it's good stuff. And you can keep that in mind as we're moving along. What I was going to talk about today was a somewhat shorter topic, and that is how can we have a generation of conservative governance in the United States of America. And I'm not talking about an election. Elections come and elections go. I personally would like to see the United States of America have conservative governance for the rest of my life. Okay? And I'm going to tell you tonight exactly how to achieve that in 2 easy steps. First step is we got to win next year. But I'll tell you, I'm optimistic. I am confident. The enthusiasm is all on our side. Okay, the Democrats, it's like a Greek tragedy. The Democrats have been destroyed by getting everything they wanted. They got everything they wanted, and it's disaster, and they're all depressed and bent out of shape, and I think it's going to be a good year. So that's the first step already. You know what the second step is? You got to fix the economy. If the conservative Republicans win and fix the economy, you will completely change the political dynamic in the United States of America for the rest of our lives. You understand? Kids graduating college today can't get a job outside of McDonald's to save their lives. Okay? You fix the economy, and you will have, and by the way, there's historical examples on this. Ronald Reagan, beat Jimmy Carter because Jimmy Carter was awful in the country, the economy was awful, but he won one of the biggest landslide re-election victories ever because he fixed the economy. I'll give you an even better example than that. Margaret Thatcher. People ask me who my favorite president was. I always say Margaret Thatcher. Okay? Margaret Thatcher inherited an economy in 1979 in Britain that was worse than Jimmy Carter's economy in America, and she completely turned it around, and prosperity was booming. And by the way, just the note about whether people think Ted Cruz could win, the Jimmy Carter campaign in 1980 was praying that Ronald Reagan would get the Republican nomination. That they were, because they say he's not electable. Yeah. He's such a fanatic. He's not electable. So that's the one we want. And when Margaret Thatcher became the head of the Conservative Party in Britain, the Labour Party was opening champagne bottles. They're like, we can always beat her. She's just a crazy fanatic. Okay, so Reagan gets reelected. He gets elected and reelected, and then people are so happy they keep voting Republican. So even after Reagan retires, they're still voting Republican. Same thing happened in Britain. 3 victories for Margaret Thatcher. When she left office, the Conservatives kept winning. You want another example? Calvin Coolidge. People forget there was a recession in 1920. And under the Democrats, under Woodrow Wilson, the Calvin Coolidge gets elected, and the economy starts booming. We've got the Roaring '20s. He gets reelected by a landslide. When he retires, the Republicans keep winning. This is how you really change things. So how do we fix the economy? Well, you have to understand what's wrong with the economy. And then I'll tell you that, and then we'll know how to fix it, okay? And it begins with the fact that for about 80 years now, the official economic policy of the United States government has been based on the writings of an economic quack named John Maynard Keynes, who back in the 30s said that government could fix a bad economy. How? By throwing money around. He said the government takes a big bucket of money and throws it all over the place. You will turn a recession into prosperity. Ben Bernanke updated this a couple of years ago. He said he wanted to get a helicopter. He was going to drop money from a helicopter all over America, and that would fix the economy, Ben Bernanke said. And that's what I wanted to talk to you guys about tonight, was called Keynesian economics. The idea that government spending is good for the economy. And so my first question, simply as an observer on this, my first question for Keynes is, where does the government get the money from that's going to stimulate the economy with? As far as I can see, there's only 3 places the government gets money. They can tax it, they can borrow it, or they can print it. If you know a fourth, meet me in the parking lot, because I only know the 3. And we can go through them in order. Taxing does not make a whole lot of sense. If the government taxes your money away from you, and then gives it back to you, are you stimulated? What was all that about? We could have just left you alone. And in fairness, that's not what Keynes says. Keynes does not say to raise taxes. He actually says to cut taxes. Okay? And his followers have largely forgotten this part. But what Keynes says is he says cut taxes and increase spending. He says spend more and tax less, because the secret to prosperity, according to John Maynard Keynes, the official economic philosopher of the United States government, the secret to prosperity is deficits. He says deficits are good, and the only thing better than deficits are bigger deficits. The bigger the better, because we're going to stimulate the economy with borrowed money. That's his plan. He says we're not going to take it out, we're only going to put it in, because we're going to borrow it. And you may recall that back in 2009, Barack Obama launched $1 trillion stimulus to stimulate the economy. They borrowed $1 trillion they didn't have on top of the regular budget deficit to stimulate the economy. And last year, more than a year ago, a year and a half ago on Fox News, they were celebrating the 5th anniversary of the Obama stimulus. And they had on the usual conservative commentator and the liberal commentator. And you know what the liberal lady said when they asked about the fact that it didn't work? Because it didn't work. right? $1 trillion, what did it accomplish? It accomplished what economists call a dead cat bounce, right? That's when you throw a dead cat on the ground and see how high it bounces. It accomplished nothing. They said if you don't pass it, unemployment could reach 8%. And they passed it, unemployment promptly reached 10.5%. And so they asked the liberal lady about that. You know what she said? She said it wasn't big enough. And that triggered a memory for me, because back when I was in college, we were learning about Roosevelt and the New Deal and the Great Depression, and Roosevelt spent all of this money and all these programs to fix the Great Depression. Do you know what they accomplished? A dead cat bounce. They accomplished nothing. After 6 years of Roosevelt and the New Deal, do you know what the unemployment rate was in this country? It wasn't 8%, it was 18%. And rising. It wasn't going down, it was going up. And I asked my professor, I said, how come all of Roosevelt's the New Deal didn't work? And you know what he said? He said it wasn't big enough. This is a nice trick. It's never worked once in the history of planet Earth. And if you ask them, they'll say it's never been big enough. And that's the problem. So there right now, I can tell you why borrowing money does not fix the economy. It's very simple. Where do you borrow it from? The economy. Where else do you borrow it from? Okay? Every dollar borrowed must be lent. Must it not? Can we agree that the dollars borrowed on Earth and dollars lent on Earth are the exact same number? Right? Okay? Why do we have borrowing and lending? It's very simple. Some people in the world have more money than they want to spend right now. Other people in the world want to spend money right now they don't have. So you know what happens? The guy who wants to spend money he doesn't have goes to the guy who has money he doesn't want to spend and borrows it. Usually there's a bank in the middle. But the bank's just a middleman. The bank's a broker. The guy who wants to spend money he doesn't have borrows it from the guy who has money he doesn't want to spend every single time. And if the government borrows the money, there is obviously less money for everybody else to borrow. You are taking it out of the economy. You're just taking it out of the credit market instead of the tax rolls. It's like taking water from one side of the pond and dumping in the other side of the pond, to make the pond go higher. It doesn't work like that. Okay? But Keynes agrees with me. He says, no, borrowing is good. And then the other thing is printing. Printing. Keynes recommends very strongly printing more money. And you might ask me, what's wrong with that? And I don't have it with me tonight, but when I do my seminar, I usually bring with me one of my most prized possessions. I own a $100 trillion bill. And it's real. It is not a fake. It's not a toy. It's not counterfeit. It's a genuine $100 trillion bill from Zimbabwe. Where 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollars will buy you a 12-ounce Pepsi. That's what you feed into the soda machine in Zimbabwe to get your soda. And people say, well, that's crazy. Whose idea was that? Well, nobody decided that per se, but the government of Zimbabwe kept running out of money, just like ours. And they kept printing more money. Just like ours does. And if you keep doing that, you destroy the value of the money you've got. How can it be otherwise? How can you keep printing more money and not destroy the value of the money you've got? And by the way, if you can print more money and not destroy the value of the money you've got, how come do we put counterfeiters in prison? We should give them medals for stimulating the economy. How come it's good for the economy when Janet Yellen does it, but it's bad for the economy when this poor clown prints the money in his basement? They're doing the exact same thing. Okay? And by the way, just I want you to understand how quickly this happened. You know what a Zimbabwe dollar was worth in 1980? Only 35 years ago. 1980, a Zimbabwe dollar was worth 2 American dollars. Double what the American dollar was worth. Today, it's 100 trillion to 1. They achieved this in not even 35 years, less than 30 years. Okay? Just by printing more money. They made some important discoveries in Zimbabwe. I call this the Zimbabwe School of Economics. they discovered that it costs no more to print a $100 trillion bill than it costs to print a $1 bill. Did you know that? The zeros are free. The printers just throw those in for free. And so the president of Zimbabwe would call up the print shop and say, I ran out of money again. Send me another tractor trailer truck full of money. Only this time, stick 3 more zeros on the end of everything, and get it on down here, because we're fresh out of money. And you keep doing that, as our country is doing that right now as we sit here. You're on the road to the $100 trillion Pepsi. Okay? Do you remember a couple of years ago, the government of Cyprus announced that they were going to confiscate 10% of everybody's bank account in Cyprus?
Yeah.
Remember that? It was a big story for a couple of days. If you had a bank account in Cyprus, tough luck on you. We're taking 10% because we need it more than you do. And I remember really well because I speak to groups about economics practically every day of my life. And for a month, 2 months straight, every talk I gave, they asked the same question first at the question period, when everyone wanted to know, will the U.S. government do that to me? Are they going to confiscate 10% of my savings? And it's a very important question with a very important answer. And the answer is no. The U.S. government will not be confiscating money from your savings account. I guarantee it. For a very simple reason. They don't have to. They've got a much easier way to achieve the exact same result. They can print money limitlessly. And when they print money limitlessly, they are taking the value out of your money, and they don't have to take your money out of the bank. Okay? I don't know if any of you have saved up $100 trillion yet. But if you did, and you went to withdraw it, and you found out it was enough to buy a Pepsi, you're going to feel like you've been robbed. And the bank's going to say, what are you talking about? It's all there. You count it again. Every penny is there. It is. But it's worthless. Because the value goes away, the dollars stay, and that's what we're risking in this country. So let's go a notch deeper into Keynes, because I think every American needs to understand Keynesian economics, not because he's right. He's arguably one of the wrongest people in the history of economic thought. But our country is being run right now on the assumption that he's right. Democrats and Republicans both. By my count, we've had 14 presidents. From Herbert Hoover to Barack Obama, 14 presidents. How many of them do you think believed in Keynesian economics, that government spending was the secret to fixing the economy? 13 out of 14. We've had one non-Keynesian president in the last 80 years. Okay, so this is what our political class believes in this country. In most cases, in both parties, certainly all the Democrats, way too many Republicans. And it goes like this. Keynes says what causes a recession, he says, is that you've got too much supply and not enough demand. You got too much stuff and not enough demand for the stuff. And so you know what happens? Factories lay off workers because there's too much stuff. Why would I pay workers to make more stuff? If I can't sell the stuff we made last week, workers go home. And now the workers are unemployed. They don't have a paycheck anymore. What happens to demand? According to Keynes, he says demand falls further. Because now they've got no money. So you've got too much supply, not enough demand. And demand is falling. And the question, in cases you're in a trap, how do you get out of the trap? And you might say, well, if the workers were to get their jobs back and the wheels of commerce would start turning, eventually they'll all pick up steam and everything would be okay. But Keynes says no. He says, no, that's no good. He says, sure, if the workers got their old jobs back, they would have money, they would have a paycheck, and they'd be able to buy stuff, and demand would go up. But they would also be producing stuff. So the supply would go up. And if supply and demand are, this is very important, if supply and demand are out of whack, and you raise them both, says Keynes, they're still out of whack. No, he says. We've got to find these workers jobs where they get paid, but where they produce I can see that some of you have read Keynes's book, and that's good. You're exactly right. He says the government will pay people to produce nothing, and then we will have more demand and not more supply, and we are the road to prosperity. Understand that efficiency has nothing to do with this. How can you produce nothing efficiently? If the government hires you to dig a hole in the ground and then fill the hole back in with the same dirt, perfect job, says Keynes. You're doing nothing, you're getting paid, happy days are here again. Yep. So, just to make sure we're following this along correctly, what does Keynes, 13 out of 14 presidents have accepted his ideas, what does Keynes say is good for the economy? He says inflation, debt, and waste. That's the secret to prosperity. If you have enough inflation, debt, and waste, things are going to go great. And what else does he recommend? Because I saved the best for last. Keynes recommends very, very highly destruction. Because if you've got too much supply and not enough demand, the quickest way to fix that is to destroy your supply. Because then you won't have too much supply anymore, will you? And maybe you guys were taught, as I was taught in school, that World War II was good for the economy. Were you taught that in school? Because of all that destruction. Keynes loves wars. His wars are the best. Because it's like a double bonus. First of all, soldiers don't produce consumer goods. They shoot bullets at each other, but they get paid. So there is demand without supply, and then as an added bonus, they blow stuff up, and then which has to be rebuilt, and so that stimulates the economy further. I'm like, if that's the answer, why doesn't Obama just call out the Air Force and carpet bomb, New York City? No one has to get hurt. We could evacuate them all. In fact, we could bring them down here. I'm sure you guys wouldn't mind putting them up for a couple of weeks at your place. And then we level and we turn Manhattan into a pile of rubble, and then every unemployed person in the country, hundreds of millions of jobs, would be created to rebuild New York City. We would have unemployment down to zero. And now the only problem is, after a certain number of years, they'd be done, right? At a certain point, New York City has been 100% rebuilt, and then you have to lay them all off because the job's over. But you know what you do then? You bomb it again. See, we can keep bombing and building and bombing and building, and we would have 100% employment forever. Except for one more problem. This is insane. And I want to welcome you to the world of mainstream economic thought in the United States of America today. There are 1,600 colleges and universities in the United States. How many of them do you think teach this in their economics department? Yeah, essentially. There's about 3 that don't. All the rest. And this is not taught as a theory. No. This is like global warming. It's settled science. We don't debate this in your economics class, university. This is just the truth from at Mount Sinai from heaven. It is that debt, waste, and destruction are the road to prosperity. Wow. You want to know what's wrong with the country? Here you go now. Can I disprove this? There's so many ways to disprove it, I hardly know where to begin. But one of my favorite economic tests is what I call the desert island test. Because there's something about desert islands. They're so refreshing. The air is so clean, and the sunshine, the ocean breezes, it clears your head. You want to understand economics? Go to a desert island. And pretty soon complicated ideas will become simple. So let's take an imaginary trip. Let's imagine that all of us here were on a ship, and we went sailing, and we came, and maybe there's a storm. We get shipwrecked on a desert island like Robinson Crusoe. Now, when I was in Los Angeles last year, they wanted it to be Gilligan's Island. So I now leave this up to you. You can be Robinson Crusoe or Gilligan, your choice, okay? But no one knows where we are. We've got no radio. We could be stuck on this island, for all you know, for the rest of our lives. Just imagine this with me for a minute. Would it not be immediately obvious to everybody that we got to produce? I mean, you wouldn't have to talk about it. We better get to work and produce right now. And I suspect we would very quickly discover another fundamental economic concept, which is called the division of labor. Very simply, some people are better at some things, and other people are better at other things. We would figure out who was good at what. We'd probably send some people into the woods to hunt for animals we could eat. We'd have people catching fish, people picking berries, people mending clothes, building huts, cooking dinner. We'd figure out what needed to be done, who was best, and we would probably exchange things with each other, don't you think? If I caught a fish and you would pick some berries, we could trade off, we'd each have a more balanced meal. Now, supposing I was there with you on this island and I said, I'm against you, so I'm not going to produce anything. But by consuming, I'm going to stimulate you to produce more. But how does that sound for an economic theory now, okay? I'm just going to lie on the beach all day and get a suntan. But when dinner comes, I'm eating a double portion of dinner. I'm going to eat twice as much dinner as anybody else, and having contributed nothing to it. Okay, and that's really going to rev up our economy. Think how great our economy will be because of all my eating. Okay, let's imagine that you built a hut to shelter yourself from the rain so you can sleep at night and not be exposed to the elements. Let's say I came along and I burned your hut to the ground. And I said, see, I've stimulated you. Now you can build it again. You thought you were going to be unemployed tomorrow. I found you a job. Rebuilding the hut I burned down. You're welcome. I think I'm going to find myself floating out to sea, strapped to a coconut. I can't imagine anybody tolerating me on their island. Okay? It's so obvious. But this is what Washington sees as the official economic. So now we get to tell you what it is that's wrong with our economy, and it's very simple. Our government pays tens of millions of people, arguably over 100 million people, not to produce. That is to say, they would produce if the government would simply quit paying them not to produce. Who's on this lengthy list? Well, let's see. We've got millions on various forms of welfare. We've got millions on unemployment insurance. And by the way, people, for years on unemployment insurance. Why do we have unemployment insurance? Where did that come from? Who invented it and why? Well, is it because we felt compassion for poor, unemployed people and then wanted to lend them a helping hand in the spirit of Christian charity? No. Unemployment insurance was invented by John Maynard Keynes with the express purpose of getting people to consume when they're not producing. He said if we pay people not to work, then they'll consume when they're not producing. If you believe this whole thing about supply and demand being out of whack, that'll help to adjust that. That's why we have unemployment insurance. We've got millions of government workers, about 20 million government workers in the United States, federal, state, and local. And some of them do jobs that actually need to be done and are actually the appropriate role for government. Law enforcement and courts, national defense. There's sound economic reasons why that needs to be done by government. Many more produce, but I suspect they are far less efficient than they would be if they were in the private sector. An obvious example of that, by the way, is teachers. I don't doubt that teachers teach. They do. But I suspect they would teach far more efficiently. That say we would get way better results at a way lower cost if it were handled in the private sector in a capitalistic model than the government model we have now. And then you've got millions and millions more who produce absolutely nothing. And if you talk about firing them, the Keynes will say, no, that will hurt the economy. It will not hurt the economy, it will expand the economy. Because they'll be forced to produce. If you stop paying them not to produce, whatever they produce will be more than we had before. And there's an interesting phenomenon because for every government job, every useless government job, parallel useless private sector jobs pop up. It's an interesting phenomenon that needs a name. But, so for example, for every EPA agent, there's an environmental consultant who gets hired by the company to protect them from the EPA guy. Okay? So you've got these, so that's not a useful job either. They're just, just building up. I'll give you one even closer to home. The IRS employs 111,000 people to make sure you pay enough taxes. So what do? You hire a tax accountant to help you protect you from the IRS agent. Okay? Is that tax accountant producing anything? No, he's not. And I want to be clear, I don't want to offend the accountants. There are useful things for accountants to do. Anyone running a business is going to want an accountant to keep track of the paperwork. That's a useful job. Okay? But these particular accountants are not helping anybody run a business. They're just wrestling with a 70,000-page tax code that we don't need. You've got the IRS agents on one side and the tax accountants on the other. They're wrestling. This is a meaningless game. These are highly educated people with graduate degrees. They could be incredibly productive, and yet we've sent them all into this dark corner of the economy where they produce nothing. The list goes on and on. I haven't even gotten to the college students staying in college into their 30s, getting graduate degrees in subjects like gay and lesbian studies, indigenous studies, women's studies, ethnic studies, Hispanic studies. One guy told me that his son was majoring in poverty studies. I said, well, there's the road to a bright future. At least when he gets there, he'll know what it is. Okay? These aren't subjects. The whole point of getting educated was supposed to be that you now have a skill that can do something useful in the economy. Just as we've separated jobs from productivity and money from wealth, okay, because if money was wealth, Zimbabwe is the richest country in the world. Okay, the homeless people there are trillionaires. Okay, okay? We've separated jobs from production, but we've separated education from actually learning anything useful. The whole point was to learn to do something, and if you spend 4 years and $200,000 learning how oppressed you are not qualified now to do anything that's useful for anybody. This is what's wrong with our economy. What did Coolidge and Reagan and Thatcher do? They shrunk the government. You shrink the government, voila, you get prosperity. It is the easiest cause and effect relationship in the entire economic world. And this is open to us right now. You get the right people in there, and they're committed to a smaller government. You will have prosperity, and you'll win every election for the rest of your life. And by the way, that initial Keynesian point about supply and demand being out of whack, is that even true? Because this is the bedrock that the whole theory rests on, is about supply and demand being out of whack. And the answer is, it's not true. It looks like it's true. If you own a store and nobody's coming into your store, and I ask you, what do you think about the economy? You're going to say, well, the economy stinks, because nobody's in my store. That's what's wrong with the economy. I suppose if a minute later a bus full of tourists comes up, and they come in and they buy everything with the bare walls, you'll say, well, now the economy's fine. They bought all my stuff, so that took care of the economy. But the answer, and we get this from an early French economist named Jean-Baptiste Say, who absolutely rips Keynes's theory to shreds. Okay, you want the answer to everything Keynes says, read Say. Although Say never mentions Keynes by name. You know why not? He hadn't been born yet. See, I would have thought that if you came up with a theory that had already been proven wrong 100 years before you were born, that would kind of get in the way of your winning a Nobel Prize in economics. I was mistaken. The Nobel Committee wasn't bothered by this at all. So this is what Say says 100 years before Keynes was born. He says it looks like supply and demand are out of whack, but it's not so because they can't be out of whack. Supply and demand have never been out of whack, not once in the history of the world, for one simple, important reason. they're the same thing. Supply and demand are not two different things. They're one and the same. Supply is demand. What does that mean practically when we say supply is demand? Well, let's take the case of the shoemaker. Why does the shoemaker make shoes? Because he really likes shoes? Shoes make him happy? He just wants to be surrounded by shoes all day long? One in California, somebody said he's got a shoe fetish. The shoemaker makes shoes because he wants bread. Right? He can't go to the baker and say, give me bread. He needs to have something that the baker wants, so he'll part with the bread. And by the way, why is the baker baking bread? Because he wants shoes. Okay? Supply is demand. If the shoemaker's wife tells him, I got an extra long list this week of what we need from the market, what must the shoemaker now do? He's got to make more shoes. Because those shoes may look like supply to you. To the shoemaker, those shoes are demand. That's what he brings to the market to get what we want. Now, we have this convenient tool of money where we trade everything for the money and then trade the money. And then, but it's the same thing. You produce whatever you produce, whether it's a service or a product, you produce what you produce in order to get things other people produce. Supply and demand are one and the same. They can't be out of whack, and you can't increase demand by itself. The only way to do that is to increase supply. If you make more, if everyone makes more, then we've got more to trade. And that's called prosperity. The last president we had that understood that was Ronald Reagan. And I think we're due for another one. So that is my economic thought for the night. I've got two more things to share quickly, and I'm happy to answer questions if you guys have questions. I wanted to, first of all, mention my book. So years ago, my friends, said, you ought to write a book. And I did, and it was like the wrong book. Everybody thought I was going to write a 500-page tome about economics. But I had an epiphany, which was that people don't read 500-page tomes about economics. You can put that on your coffee table, the dust will be 3 inches thick. If you write something that's fun and funny and accessible to people, you'll reach millions who will never read the economics book. And so my first book was called The New Democrat, and it's obviously based on The Cat. Has everyone read The Cat in the Hat? Yep. See, my thought was that our president, Barack Obama, is awfully like the Cat in the Hat. Okay? If you remember the book, the cat shows up uninvited at this middle-class American house. What's he do when he gets inside? He wrecks the place. He wrecks everything he touches. And I was like, that's Obama. That's it. And the fascinating thing about the cat is he never gets it. To the last page of the book, the cat never understands what's obvious to everybody else. And that is that he is the problem. I was like, that's Obama. That's exactly his personality. Can you imagine the man ever coming to suspect that he's the problem? In 100 million years, that thought would never cross his mind. He, like the cat, is utterly convinced that whatever he does must be a good idea because he doesn't think he's capable of having a bad idea. And then he's got these two little friends, Thing 1 and Thing 2, do you remember? And they became Pelosi and Reed. And I realized I was writing the first published history of the Obama years, or at least the first one in rhyme. And it goes through bailouts and stimuluses, death panels, birth certificates, everything you remember from 6 fun-filled Obama years, all done as the Cat in the Hat. And I got last year my first book review. I was so proud. Salon.com reviewed my book, and they said that this is the most twisted piece of conservative propaganda print matter. I was mighty happy that day. That's on the cover. And I was moved to write my second book. Who's read The Lorax by Dr. Seuss? Okay, it was a movie a couple years ago also. Dr. Seuss was a huge leftist capitalist, lifelong member of the Socialist Party, not the Democrats, the American Socialist Party. He fills his children's books with socialist lessons for your kids. And the Lorax was his environmentalist book. It's about an evil capitalist called the Onceler, who cuts down trees and makes consumer goods. And we are taught that that is bad, bad, bad. He drives the trees to extinction. He wipes them out. They're extinct. There's no more trees. And then his factory promptly goes out of business. And I read this to my kids, and I said, does this make sense to you? Do capitalists destroy species that their business depends on? Is Colonel Sanders going to drive the chicken to extinction? Does anybody worry about that? That Colonel Sanders is going to throw every last chicken into the fryer until they're extinct, and then we'll never see another chicken again for the rest of our lives. I think it's exactly the opposite. I think Colonel Sanders cares more about the survival of the chicken species than pretty much anybody else on Earth, including the chickens. He's got billions of dollars wrapped up in this. There will always be more chickens as long as Colonel Sanders has anything to do about it. And I'll tell you something else. There are more chickens alive in the world today than ever before in history. Do you know why? Because we like to eat them. That's why. The greatest thing that ever happens to a species is that human beings like to eat you. This is like winning the species lottery, okay? You can talk about chickens or cows, wheat, corn, pick whatever species you want. We clear millions of acres just for you. We keep the predators away. We feed you. You get sick. We bring in doctors for you. What other species gets this? Now, in the end, we kill you and eat you. But that was going to happen anyhow. What do you think happens in the wild? If you're a chicken in the wild, how does your life end? You move to Miami and buy a condo on South Beach, okay? You're getting killed and eaten, and far more unpleasantly in the wild than an old McDonald's farm. So this was a book that desperately needed to be parodied. Mine is called The Gorax because it stars Al Gore as the Lorax character, and it's about how America used to be free and prosperous. And we were prosperous because we were free. We were the freest country that ever was in the history of the world. And we quickly became the most prosperous country in the history of the world. Do you think that's a coincidence? Okay? And then the environmentalist wackos showed up and destroy everything. At the end of my book, there's no more jobs, there's no more factories, there's nothing happening except for the Fed, which keeps printing money, but everything else is shut down. So that's what I say. And then I'm very proud to share with you my latest book, just out. It's first run, and it's obviously based on The Wizard of Oz. My first thought was that Bill Clinton made a really great wizard. Because, the wizard's a charlatan. Okay? It's all fake. It's all trickery. And I thought Bill Clinton was as perfect as the wizard. When they first meet him in the book, they say, "Are you the Wizard of Iz?" He says, "It all depends on your definition of Iz." The one bit of literary license I took is that I turned Dorothy into a time traveler. The tornado blows her from 1900, which is when Frank L. Baum wrote The Wizard of Oz. She gets blown from 1900 into the 2016 election. And her house lands on Obama, and she finds herself in the land of the free lunchkins, who have been living off of the government for so long, they've forgotten how to do anything for themselves anymore, and they become enslaved because they can't do anything. And so she ends up freeing the free lunchkins. I'm actually happy about this. And I wanted to make this a very complete story about what I see going on in America today. So I tried to bring in all these different elements. Do you remember the scarecrow doesn't have a brain? My scarecrow has 14 graduate degrees, but they're all in left-wing claptrap. He's got degrees in women's studies and lesbian studies and all that stuff. He knows nothing. He keeps going back to graduate school. It doesn't help. And so he's trying to get a brain. My Tin Man is a businessman who doesn't like paying taxes. And his friends say, well, you don't have a heart. If you had a heart, you would enjoy paying taxes. So he's trying to get a heart so he can learn to like paying taxes. And then remember there was a cowardly lion? Well, I turned him into a cowardly rhino who suspects that the Democrats are wrong, but he's scared to do anything about it. So he's trying to get the courage to do it. So they all go off to get their problem solved. They meet the Wicked Witch, who obviously is Hillary. The witch is destroyed. You kind of have to see the page if you can. The witch is destroyed by the wisdom of our founding fathers. The wisdom of our American heritage escapes and destroys the witch. I'll show you the page. And so they go back to the wizard to get their problem solved. And the scarecrow learns that you don't learn by going to a college and listening to a Marxist professor who's never done anything in his life other than be a Marxist professor. Okay, you learn by doing. You produce. You learn how to do it better and faster. That's how you learn. And the Tin Man learns that you do not help the poor when you pay taxes, because government is in the business of making poor people poorer. Okay, and it's not by accident either, as I have Bill Clinton say in my book. He says as people get poorer and poorer, their vote for the Democrats gets surer and surer. Okay, this is not an accident. Government makes people poorer. You know how you help the poor? You produce. You produce things. Who feeds the poor? The guy in Washington printing food stamps? Or the farmer growing the food? You know, government pays the farmer to grow less food, so it'll be more expensive. Okay? The farmer growing the food is the one feeding the poor. And that's what he learns. And the cowardly rhino learns that people don't want somebody in the middle. They want somebody who's got principles and a vision and can stand for something that can bring our country back to the greatness that we used to have. And then I thought long and hard about what to do with Dorothy. There was a stage when I was writing this, I was trying to figure out like a balloon, would take her back. And I finally decided it was the wrong answer. The answer that Dorothy learns is that you can't go back. Because you can't go back in time. That's not an option. Okay? What she learns is that we can learn from the past. We cannot return to it. What you have to do is take the world that God put you in and change it and make it better. And our friends at the end of the book go off to change the country and make it what it can be. And that I realized was the right message for Dorothy, and I think the right message for us. Anyhow, if you're interested, I have some of these with me. They make awesome gifts, for like conservative people, if you happen to know any. So I've got them over here on my table. And the final thing I was going to do is I usually do a quick video whenever I give a talk, which is what the camera is for, and I put them on my Facebook page. If you haven't yet, friend me on Facebook. I'm the only Loren Spivak on earth. I'm easy to find. And if you friend me on Facebook, you can see all my videos, my brilliant thoughts of the day, going back. Actually, Scott, because I know your name, I'm going to pick on you to be the cameraman. I see someone press the button on the camera. All right, so you come to do that? Sure. Okay? And the button's right back here. You just hold it still so it doesn't shake, or push it for on and push it for off. Okay? It's already done. Yep, it's fine. It's fine, and I can see myself. Hold on a second. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to say that I'm here in, what's the name of the town again? Tavares, with the North Lakes Tea Party, right?
Okay. Right.
Yeah. Okay, and when I say that, you all want to applaud.
Okay.
I don't want to like overly coach you or anything, but if it sounds like, people are going to say there's two of them, they got one hand each, okay? Enthusiasm sounds good. Don't go on for an hour, but for 2 seconds you want to whistle or whatever, jump up and down. Enthusiasm sounds good, okay? And because I'll put this on my Facebook page, and people all over the country look at my Facebook page every day. So, okay, so then I'm going to give a 3-minute thought for the day, and then at the end of my 3-minute thought, I'm going to say, I'm the free market warrior. Those are my last words. That's my sign-off, and you want to applaud again. Once when I mention the group at the beginning, and once when I say the free market warrior at the end. When we applaud at the end, let the applause run for 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3, shut it down. Okay? Just 3 seconds. Well, a week ago I was doing this somewhere and they let it, he thought I said 3 years. Okay? Can we turn the lights on this side? Is there a switch for that? Well, there we go. Perfect, perfect. Whenever you're ready. I'm Loren Spivak, the free market warrior, and I'm here in Tavares, Florida, with the North Lakes Tea Party. I've got a free market warrior moment for you. I gotta tell you, I predicted years ago. I'm sorry I did, but I predicted Paul Ryan back when in 2010, when he wrote the roadmap to America's future. Everyone said, "Oh my gosh, he's a Tea Party conservative. He's our guy. What a great reformer he is." And nobody else read the roadmap to America's future. I read it. I read it very carefully, and I discovered that he cuts nothing. He gets rid of no government program, no matter how small or how ridiculous. He cuts absolutely nothing. In his plan, this was like a compromise he made with the Democrats. Okay, this is his plan. He can put in anything he wanted. Every single government program, department, and agency gets bigger under Paul Ryan's roadmap to America's future. And I've been warning people about this for years. And my free market warrior moment a couple months ago, when he became speaker, I said, "Listen, I'm an open-minded guy. I'll give him a chance. So I'm not going to say anything negative. Let's see what he can do for us." And now we've seen. We got the Paul Ryan House budget, which is everything that Obama and the Democrats want, and nothing for the conservatives. It expands everything. It pays for Planned Parenthood. It pays for the illegal, the immigration, the Muslim refugees from Syria. It pays for it all. Everything. It's Nancy Pelosi's budget. And you don't take my word for this. Ask Nancy Pelosi. I think we can agree that Nancy Pelosi is a qualified expert on what Nancy Pelosi wants. And Nancy Pelosi said he gave up the store to us, to Nancy Pelosi. It's everything that she wants in this budget. And I want my friends out there who voted for Republican congressmen in the last 3 elections, it's been 6 years since we took over the House, in 2010, in 2012, and again in 2014. And the people who voted for those Republicans and donated for those Republicans and worked for those Republicans, I want you to understand, this is what you worked for. You worked for Nancy Pelosi. We've got 2 parties in Washington that are both being run by Nancy Pelosi. Okay? And I don't, I'm not a negative, cynical person. I'm an optimist. I'm full of hope. But we need to be smart about this. And I want to say this very clearly. It is more important that conservatives take over the Republican Party than that the Republican Party wins in November. Okay? We need to worry less about November and more about who the Republicans are that we actually send to Washington. Because we've got 2 parties that are both run by Nancy Pelosi. And I know they don't look alike, but Paul Ryan shaves off the beard. He's Nancy Pelosi. Okay? Why should I care which one of those Nancy Pelosi party wins? Okay? I would very clearly, and no one else will tell you this, but I will, I would rather lose with a true conservative than win with someone who's going to do everything the liberals want anyhow. Okay? Being the second most powerful party in Washington, you can actually do some things with that. If you have support, I'd rather win, don't get me wrong. Okay, that's even better, is to win all the way, and I think we can. But it is more important that we change the direction of the Republican Party into something that's useful than what we've got now, which is to surrender to whatever it is the other side wants. And I am the free market warrior. Okay, if you guys have questions, should I take questions?
Yeah, we got some.
Yes, sir.
I think whoever's nominated for president, they need their first choice should be Secretary of the Treasury to get the economy going again figure out how to fix the mess we're in.
Shrink the government.
And I think a great candidate would be Dave Ramsey. And if you ever listen to Dave
I
Ramsey,
have.
he would fix the problem that we have. He might go out and sell stuff we own. Because that's the first way he gets out of debt, is start selling stuff. We've got millions of acres of land, we've got all of these forests, everything else.
Which do nothing. When they're owned by the federal government, that means they're just put away and there's nothing's ever done.
Well, actually, it's worse than that because we have to take care of them. So we have people to take care of them. Now, in Florida, last year, the environmentalists passed this deal where they're going to take trillions or millions, billions of dollars and buy land that belongs to the people of the state of Florida to do nothing with. We already had 25% of the state that belongs to the federal government and the state government. But they're going to buy more. Well, they can't take care of what they've got. So if we had somebody, and I don't know if you remember, you're an economist, but when this economy was collapsing there, Dave Ramsey had a plan to actually take care of it and figure out how to fix it. It was a lot different than what Obama did. And we'd be in a lot better shape if we listened to him then.
Well, absolutely. And by the way, I never thought of Dave Ramsey, but I think it's an excellent choice. Okay?
He doesn't have a fancy degree.
Well, the degrees are worse than useless
Right.
because what I told you about Keynes is what they're teaching in the colleges. Okay? And you certainly don't want anyone with any Washington experience because that's worse than anything. You need less government workers, less government land, less government ownership, and that's what frees everything up. And what gets us there, it's worth. I mentioned the recession in 1920. Do you know what Harding and Coolidge did in response to the recession in 1920? They shrunk the government by 25% in 4 years. And the economy boomed. 10 years later, when there was a recession in 1929-30. Okay, Roosevelt comes in, and by the way, and Hoover also, they both greatly expanded the government and dragged out the Great Depression for the next decade. And the contrast just could not be clearer. Less government gets you more prosperity and fast. So anyhow, good suggestion. I endorse it. Was there anyone else? Yes, sir.
I'm just very concerned about would we put the economy in a tailspin if we were to shut down the Department of Education, the Department of Energy, EPA. If we were to go to a flat tax and get rid of the IRS, wouldn't all those people be out of work then? And
I appreciate the humor in which you're asking it, but it's a very important answer to the question. They are at work now, and they produce nothing. They are actually negative producers. We produce less because we've got these departments. If they would just call in sick, if the EPA would call in sick, for the next 2 years, the economy would boom. We'd be better off with them being unemployed than with them working. But the fact is, if you fired them, they'd soon find other jobs, which would require them to actually produce, because you can't get a job in the private sector without producing something for somebody. So it would actually be a tremendous jolt, a positive jolt to the economy, to fire half the people who work for the federal government. You would boom the economy like that. Now, the mainstream economists won't tell you that, but I'm telling you that. Yes, ma'am.
And what do you think about the fair tax?
I think the fair tax is probably better than what we have now. Like what we're talking about, the fair tax is the sales tax for everything.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I think it's better than what we have now. It's not as big a priority for me as shrinking the government.
Oh, absolutely.
The first thing that when fair tax people say it's revenue neutral. I don't want revenue neutral.
Right.
I want to shrink the government.
Yeah.
Okay? But yes, it would be far better and simpler to have a consumption tax as opposed to an income tax. Is far less intrusive. It would be far less complicated to enforce. My proposal is to, and this would have to be done by a constitutional amendment, is to replace all taxes in America with one single tax. Because one of the reasons it's so inefficient is you've got real estate tax, so your town has to have an assessor's office to assess your house with a real estate tax. Then you've got sales tax, so they have to have thousands of people keeping track of all the merchants all over the state for the sales tax. And then you've got income tax, you have the 111 IRS people. It's just incredibly inefficient to tax 49 different ways. If we had one For example, sales tax, by the way, also part of my constitutional amendment, was that it be capped at 10%. A constitutional amendment guaranteeing every American the constitutional right to keep 90% of their income. Give 6% to the feds, 3% to the state, 1% to the municipality, and that's what you get. That's your budget. Do what everyone else in the world does, prioritize, okay? And if you want to do more than that, too bad. You afford what you can afford. Okay? And as the economy grows, I suppose they'll be able to afford more. But I think, constitutional, so it's permanent, and one tax, so it's more efficiently collected. So yeah, that would be way better.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am?
How much are you going?
The deal on the books is this: they're $24.95. I can do all three for $59.95, and I can do checks and credit cards.
There are only two.
I knew you would notice that. I am temporarily, which means like 2 weeks away from getting a new shipment of the New Democrat. So what I will do, if you'd like to get the 3 or the New Democrat or whatever, is they just landed in California. I will have them in 2 weeks, and I'll do a mailing label, and I will send you the third one, and I'll pay the postage. I'll cover the postage on that. And, okay. So anyhow, so that's so sorry. I should have gotten them weeks ago. They had a very long journey from the print shop. But anyhow, so that's the answer on that. So one is $24.95, or 2 for $44.95, or all 3 are $59.95, and checks and credit cards are fine. And I'm happy to autograph them.
Okay.
Was there another question?
I have mine autographed.
That's it. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, thank you so much.